Anime is becoming more and more popular, and that is awesome. Kind of, but it's great that more people are enjoying the hundreds of different kinds of fantastic worlds on offer. As a new fan, the abyss of anime potential can be hella daunting. It can be really easy to just search My Anime List Top 10 and watch the most recent anime of the season, but it will mean you'll miss out on some of the most impactful masterpieces of the past. That's why we're here, as two older anime fans, to talk about some of the basics that can help you choosing your first anime.
Shounen, Shoujo, Josei, and Seinen are 4 terms you should get used to. Sometimes used like genres, but using them as genres will definitely cause you confusion. I think it's better to think of these 4 terms as demographics.
For some people, anime lives and dies in the shonen category, but if you're watching this video, you probably already have an inkling that there's a bit more to anime. Shonen is an editorial category used by manga publishers. This word literally translates to few years, and was initially intended for children of any gender, but shifted to be more boy-focused at the beginning of the 20th century when separating manga by gender and not just age started to be popularized. This younger male demographic is the key target audience for all modern shonen anime. That's not to say you can't enjoy them if you're different than the target demographic. That's like saying that you can't go watch the Sonic movie because the primary demographic is children. Art is art, and anyone can enjoy its message regardless of who they are. In shonen, specifically, that message is kick-ass romance.
Because each of these 4 demographics are so distinct, they tend to be published in different magazines, or more recently apps. As these magazines will have tens of series running simultaneously, and if you like something like One Piece, you'll probably also like Demon Slayer and Jujutsu Kaisen. This makes finding something you like a little easier. You can just start with a publication aimed at your age or gender, and find a series you want to follow. And then if you want to watch anime, you can seek out the adaptations of those series. Or alternatively, just find that same demographic on My Anime List. The first manga magazine that normally comes to mind is almost always Weekly Shonen Jump. First published in 1968 as a bi-weekly publication before moving to weekly the following year. When it was first published it cost 90 yen, and is now only 290. This cheap price point has allowed it to be accessible to its key demographic of young boys. It's pocket money priced. To keep prices low, it's printed on thin multicolored paper, with sparse glossy pages and frequent advertisements throughout. We paid £6.70 for this imported tankobon, which still feels like a good deal considering any one volume of manga with 3 or 4 chapters is close to £8 now. Shonen Jump is the home of many popular manga, like One Piece, Naruto, and My Hero Academia, as well as having published classics like JoJo, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Slam Dunk. And as of 2019, you also now have the English language Shonen Jump app. This is home to all the magazine staples, but some app-only works like Spy X Family and Dandadan.
This was actually a positive for Shonen Jump, which had previously dropped titles if they were not performing well, but now they can host an unlimited amount of manga virtually, with the big hitters remaining in the physical publication. Unfortunately, they still do drop manga from the publication regularly, but the app has definitely given us some manga that would have died before they could get going.
Koro Comic is an interesting shonen manga magazine with works targeting an even younger male audience, with manga like Pokemon and Yokai Watch. It was established in 1977 by Shogakukan to host Doraemon, which had previously been published across 6 of their magazines and brought all of these chapters together in one convenient place. It runs monthly and is much smaller than your typical magazine at A5. Easy for small hands to hold. Their sales are about 1/10 of Shonen Jump's, which is impressive considering they publish 1/4 of the volumes. They hold as one of Japan's largest publications of manga, ranking 3rd. Shogakukan also publishes Weekly Shonen Sunday, which has been released every Tuesday since 1959, up until 2011 when they switched to, you guessed it, Wednesday. While being on the lower end of sales compared to Shonen Jump, it's still one of the top sellers and has hosted classic manga like Inuyasha, Detective Conan, and Hayate the Combat Butler. More recently has published manga like Call of the Night, Tonikawa, and Komi-san Can't Communicate. Of the main 52 manga magazines in publication in Japan as of April 2023, 12 of them are shonen, which actually makes it the 2nd smallest. This seems to be due to the monopolization, as 1/4 of those are all by Shueisha, who publish Weekly Shonen Jump. In fact, there are only 5 publishers, and 4 of them have at least one magazine in each of Shonen, Shoujo, Josei, and Seinen. The only exception is Good Smile, which publishes 2 Seinen magazines. There are also a lot of magazines which are spin-offs and occupy a different niche, because while demographics are a good way to start, there are other things that cause a separate magazine to be worthwhile. In the shonen category, Shogakukan publishes publishes Weekly Shonen Sunday, which is a general shonen magazine, Korokoro, which skews a little younger and has a different physical format. They also publish Gesan, which is a shonen magazine for monthly serialized manga. Shueisha publish Weekly Shonen Jump, but also Jump Square, a monthly publication. They also have another monthly shonen called Saikyo Jump, which started in 2010 to combine Weekly Shonen Jump and a spin-off called V-Jump, which also covered video games. Because of this, a lot of its current serializations are video game tie-ins, like Dragon Quest, The Adventures of Dai, and the Fire Emblem Engage manga. These have a separate niche in gamers, but also host spin-offs of Weekly Shonen Jump manga, like One Piece Party, which is authored by A. Ando instead of Oda. This helps prevent saturation in Weekly Jump of any one series, as well as bulking out their lineup so the magazine feels more worthwhile.
In the West, these categories/demographics have a slightly different meaning. Generally, shonen is used to describe action anime, but if the action and fighting becomes too realistic, it dares to err into the territory of big seinen. A good way to find out if the anime is shonen or seinen is if the protagonist is a boy between the ages of 12 to 18, then there's a good chance you're looking at a shonen. The best way to find out is just to look at the tags on whatever totally legal place you're looking to get your fix. Since all the big action shows are the most commonly talked about, let us big ol' weebs recommend you some shonen of our own, because we want our videos to be a place where you can discover lesser known or underhyped shows. Hajime no Ippo, the incredibly well-loved boxing anime, is the most condensed and powerful sports anime I have ever watched. Even with the show being nearly 23 years old, I would still wholeheartedly recommend this masterclass in hype. I find that a lot of new anime fans tend to ignore older shows, and that's such a shame. Hajime no Ippo was written and illustrated by George Morikawa, starting all the way back in 1989. The story is about an incredibly shy boy named Ippo Makunouchi, quickly falling into and in love with boxing. And you will fall in love with the sport too through his countless hard-fought bouts in the ring. I've watched the Ippo anime back to front a few times, and I still highly recommend it. It's been resonating with me especially recently because I've been working in a martial arts gym. Every time I watch it, I start to think, oh, I should totally take up boxing. I haven't yet, but one day I will. I would even highly recommend watching the incredibly jank 2000s dub. It just has a certain...
Whoa. That's it. That's the spirit. Now look over there. He looks like he's really hurting, doesn't he?
Amateurness, but it's still wholesome and the vibe is on point, and I just don't want you to miss out on it. There's just something about the speed lines in the background and the bursts of air coming out of the fighter's feet that give it this incredible impact. The way the world abstracts, leaving you in the zone with the characters, before slowly fading back in to ruminate on the gravity of each action. Like most sports anime, the emotional payoff comes from knowing the stakes of everyone involved. The benefit of it being about boxing is that it's just so damn personal, and it just oozes a love for boxing. And if you're not sporty like me, sports anime like Ippo can really show you the appeal. Have you ever seen or heard of Death Note? I'm sure you have. Did you know there's an anime loosely based off the mangaka's experience creating it? Bakuman is an anime about Moritaka Masahiro and his classmate Akito Tagaki growing as manga creators. Bakuman has so much of the creator's soul embedded into it. With art by Obata Takashi and story by Oba Tsugumi, their roles mirror the roles of the two lead characters. Fun fact, very little is known about Oba Tsugumi. There are many theories, but that's a topic for a whole other video. Bakuman follows the lead boys through meeting at school, all the way up to their manga getting an anime adaptation. It's a very raw but probably realistic snapshot into the hectic lives of manga creators. There's a really nice romance subplot throughout the story weaving into the main plot towards the end for a really satisfying conclusion. Definitely worth a watch.
My first recommendation is a cruel one, Pumpkin Scissors by Ryotaro Iwanaga. It has an interesting story set in pseudo-World War II, with elements of character drama and tough topics like the effects of war, human experimentation, and alienation. Sounds great, right? So why did I say it's cruel? Well, there are only 24 episodes of the anime, which I haven't touched, but has a rating of 7.16 on my anime list, so it's probably decent, if an incomplete story. But despite everywhere saying it's still in publication, I haven't been able to find a chapter dated from after 2020, and there's nothing I hate more than reading an incomplete series. I will not touch a series if it's gonna hurt me that way. But I did read Pumpkin Scissors, and it was amazing enough that I will forgive it for vanishing into the abyss. If anyone knows what happened to it, please contact me immediately. Next up, As the Gods Will. This is a manga written by Muneyuki Kaneshiro, and consists of two parts, with the second being called As the Gods Will, the second series. This manga was one of the first Death Game series I ever read and holds a special place in my heart, and as far as I'm concerned, it still stands up to being a good one. But it's the second series that really made me fall in love. At over 4 times as long, it begins as a sort of prequel, a parallel, before joining back up to where the first manga ended. It's just so fun and enjoyable. It makes me happy. It hasn't had an anime adaptation, but if you can find the live action movie, it's a fun way to experience the first manga with some interesting changes that make it stand out on its own as a different experience.
Horimiya, the slice of life romance, is indeed a shonen from the Japanese editorial categorization. But being a romance, I think a fair few Western fans would consider this a shoujo. Discussions online debate it, but with the recent rise of romance manga starring male protagonists in Shonen Jump, it's an interesting indication of the publication attempting to diversify its genres. Although, if you want romance, you really can't go wrong with a bit of shoujo. Shoujo is a Japanese word that literally translates to girl, but in the context of anime and manga, it means young girl. The sister term to shonen, shoujo anime tend to star girls in the same 12 to 18 range as shonen, originally coined in the Meiji era to describe women that weren't wives and weren't children. It parallels the idea of the teenager in the 1950s, but your average shoujo was demure and sexless, with the term moga being more similar to the idea of teenage rebellion. Moga was eventually replaced in the 1980s by gyaro, and shoujo became more of a marketing term than a subculture. Unlike the action-packed power of friendship shows for boys, anime for girls typically tends to be filled with romance and is often set in the real world. Not always though. Snow White with the red hair, Yona of the Dawn, and Fujingi Yui come to mind as standout examples set in fantasy settings. Generally, shoujo anime take on a slightly more mature tone than their shonen counterparts, with their character-based drama, but that does not protect them from some of the more tropey elements, like obvious misunderstandings, interrupted confessions, and long build-ups. I'm looking at you, Kimi ni Todoroki. But these, like shonen, are for younger teenagers after all. The original shoujo magazines of the early 1910s and 1920s focused on the concept of shoujo shotetsu, or girls' novels, to determine what would appeal to girls for their magazines. This includes concepts like poetry, adaptations of foreign novels like Little Princess, essays, and memoirs.
There was also an emphasis on the Class S genre, which is a precursor to Shoujo-ai, a genre still common in contemporary shoujo manga and anime. Despite some of the biggest originators of shoujo being women like Nobuko Yoshia and Toshiko Ueda, it was heavily male-dominated until the 1960s. Part of this rise in female manga authors was due to a shift to weekly publications to rival TV shows. Magazines started running competitions for new content to fill their suddenly sparse schedules. Women dominated these submissions, and many went on to develop a career in the manga industry, like Machiko Satonaka, who has authored over 500 manga in her career. The magazines would often still publish all the names of those who entered along with their prefecture, which often took up 2 pages of the magazine, with one May 1936 issue of Shoujo no Tomo having 7 pages of names, which I think is adorable and shows such a care for these girls.
When thinking about shoujo publishers in the West, one that immediately comes to mind is Shoujo Beat, with its physical publication running from 2005 to 2009 in North America. Shoujo Beat manga are probably what most Western fans associate with shoujo to this day, although its lineup definitely contains some Josei manga, like Nana. As an English fan getting into anime in the late 2000s, I missed the boat on getting the big magazine releases, if we even got them over here.
We did! I actually subscribed to the English anime and manga magazine Neo for a good full year or so in 2011. It was a great way to get inside information or announcements for the latest releases in a time when my interactions with the internet were rather limited. It's a shame I threw out a lot of them, because it would have been really cool to look back on that piece of anime history. At least they're still running with a monthly release schedule. I'd love to get back into collecting them, so if anyone from Neo sees this, please sponsor us. We can't even access the Viz Media app in England, but we can access the Shonen Jump app, and oh, look, this is the same damn app, but one is just missing a load of really interesting manga from other demographics. Life really do be easier if you're a shonen fan. At least we still have other memes. There is a big difference in naming conventions between shonen and shoujo magazines. Shonen is to the point, it's shonen, it's weekly, it's jump. But shoujo magazines use exotic and cute sounding foreign words like chow, cookie, ribbon, and cheese. Ribbon is the oldest manga magazine still in publication, having been established in 1955, but only seems to have 4 serializations currently, and a website that is slow as it is adorable, but definitely seems to imply a lot more on offer from what parts of the website I could access. Cheese is a monthly romance magazine with another small selection of manga, and costs a lot more than your average volume of Jump at 570 yen. I couldn't find a physical copy to see how it compares, but it seems to be about the same size, just with less pages. They also have a subsection of their serialization called Premium Cheese, which isn't relevant, but it did make me laugh. Chow is the biggest shoujo magazine, with sales similar to Weekly Shonen Sunday, and always comes with a free gift. Some of Chow's most notable works include Revolutionary Girl Utena, Cutie Honey Flash, and Hamtaro. The free gifts in Japanese magazines tend to be far more elaborate than I ever experienced in England, with fashion magazines containing entire handbags or full-size makeup products. But manga ones seem to be less exciting. Shao seems to have primarily paper crafts, and Chi's having a plastic bookmark in this volume. But others like Lala and Hanata Yume apparently had drama CDs, calendars, and stationery. These free gifts seem less prevalent in boys' magazines. Maybe publishers feel the need to bribe their female audience.
Shoujo is seen as dying, and the numbers and reception at least show it to be smaller than shonen. With many magazines being monthly, offering less serializations and relying on cheap free gifts, it isn't so surprising that the best shoujo magazine is just scraping the top 10 at 10th place. Unfortunately, this decline in manga also means a decline in anime, and shoujo certainly seems to have fallen by the wayside in recent years, with barely 1 or 2 shows a season. The rise in otome game isekai having filled a few of these spots in the past few years, but go back to the early 2000s and you easily had 3 to 5 new shows a season, plus continuations. Anime being shorter definitely seems to affect fans here, as good long-running shows like Maid-Summer would run across seasons, making up for the lack of new releases. Now there's less content and less of that content. Someone far more obsessive than me might be willing to track down the number of episodes and seasons over the past 3 decades, but that would be insane, right?
So I spent 3 hours typing out all the data into a spreadsheet, and then another few hours creating graphs from it, and here are my findings. First up, you can absolutely see the trends I and many other anime fans have been feeling for a few years. There are more shows, and they have less episodes. We're almost hitting a Pacific Rim-esque singularity point of a dead average of 12 episodes. Last season it averaged 12.6. Next up, let's address these spikes in the average episodes. I'll break each one down by reason. Fall 1994, a comedy anime that ran for 20 years and had 1,800 episodes. Winter 1996, the release of Detective Conan, which is still going today at over 1,000 episodes. Summer 1996. This one's a gag comedy that ran for 373 episodes. Fall 1999, One Piece was actually only half the issue here. A show called Lam Mal, or The 3000 Ways of Blue Cat, really lived up to its name by having 3,057 episodes. Apparently this is because it's a science show that replies to viewer questions, which is a very cute format for a kids show. To try and adjust for these anomalies, I removed these 5 shows, which also very nicely evened out the axes. This lets us see the trend a little easier. It's basically a big cross, and also allows us to imagine a world without One Piece. Another trend I spotted is there seems to be a cycle of high capacity and low capacity seasons. To see this more clearly, here are 2 other graphs showing this by average and total. From this we can see these peaks seem to be spring and fall. The main time this seems to break is the high capacity winter of 2021, which follows on from a high capacity fall. If I had to guess, this would be when a lot of shows were pushed back due to the pandemic. The early 2010s also seems to be a little looser with this up and down, but I couldn't begin to guess why. And research gave me conflicting views on this era, that it was both a boom and a fall of the industry. But according to my data, it was the start of a boom that continued until 2018. Okay, what else can I do with this data? Here it is as a pie chart. 3D pie chart. Whatever this thing is. Whew. Okay, now all that work feels worthwhile. Feel free to draw your own conclusions from this data as well, and let us know in the comments what you think you see.
So, while waiting for your next hit of teen drama and romance can suck, there are some awesome older shows to tide you over. My first recommendation for a budding shoujo fan is DN Angel. DN Angel released in the spring anime season 2003, with a total of 26 episodes adapted from the manga of the same name, which was written and illustrated by Yukiru Sugisaki. If you enjoy phantom thieves in a high school setting steeped in romance, this one's for you. Starring Daisuke Niwa, a boy who is literally described to have few redeeming qualities. This feels so mean. But through an unexpected turn of events, he discovers his dark family secret, and he finds himself transforming into the infamous phantom thief Dark Mousy. I genuinely don't remember him being called that. Anyway, I really enjoyed this show as a teenager. I had a period at around 16 years old where I binge watched every Phantom Thief anime I could. I would love to make a Phantom Thief anime video one day. Some people prefer the manga, but as someone who's only watched the anime, I would recommend the anime. One anime I genuinely can't stop thinking about is Skip Beat. Oh my god, Skip Beat. I haven't watched it in years, I don't know if it still holds up, but I absolutely loved watching Kyoko storm her way into showbiz to get revenge on her childhood friend. The main draw of Skip Beat has to be the protagonist Kyoko. She is mad on screen, fantastic to watch. The anime only has 25 episodes, with not the most satisfying ending, but the manga is still ongoing. I never did read it, I always meant to, but it's been ongoing since 2002, so maybe now's the time to start.
I've never really been into romance manga, so this is really not my forte. I even scrolled through over 3,000 titles on my anime list and could count the ones I'd read on both hands. So for me it has to be Shugo. I just love Amu's punk aesthetic, and it's a fun nostalgic watch and read for me. Although, if we're going by my anime list's definition, I can recommend Cowboy Bebop and Banana Fish as shoujo. I can kind of see Banana Fish as BL as a common subgenre in shoujo. I have no clue how Bebop fits in. Maybe Spike is just such a pretty boy he has to be for the girls. Interestingly, a lot of horror is aimed at a shoujo audience, with this being a known subgenre since the 1970s, so I at least feel better about my love of death game manga like Doll's Code and the entire works of Junji Ito. That's girly stuff.
With that, we've talked about the two most popular demographics. I think it's time to move on to their lesser known cousins, Seinen and Josei. These two often get lumped in together with Shounen and Shoujo, but are in fact distinct demographics in Japan, and I really feel they should be discussed separately. Anime has such a wide-reaching audience, and stories that appeal to a 15-year-old boy might not appeal to a 30-year-old woman. Speaking of women,
Josei as a term originated in the 1980s as a way to differentiate the more mature stories emerging at the time, although it was initially used less than the term ladies comic or reidikomi was used, but shifted due to it being seen as low quality or pornographic. Josei was actually a more common term in the West than in Japan for a while, with most things being categorized as shoujo. This explains a lot of ambiguity where shoujo is referred to as being for girls and young women. For simplicity as a Western fan, it helps to think of Josei as for adult women, and if you're looking in English, this is still a useful category for you to consider if you want more mature stories aimed at women. One of the first Josei publications was Josei 7, which wanted to publish gekiga, as opposed to manga, with its first story being Mashiko Banka by Miyako Maki, a prolific shoujo author who wanted to turn her hand to more mature works to match her audience as they grew up. Other magazines popped up following this, including Papillon and Funny, but neither found any commercial success and only released a few issues, which probably contributed to this idea that Josei was not a desirable demographic to pursue. Josei 7 is still running, but it's more of a tabloid or gossip magazine, with a nauseating amount of text on the front cover. My Japanese is minimal, so I'm relying on translations. Here are some of those headlines, which are definitely dramatic, but not the way the original Gekiga had envisioned, I fear. A lot of ladies' comics like Be Loved by Kondensha, You by Shueisha, and Shogakukan's Big Comic for Lady all got their starts by being special editions of their shoujo manga magazines, before becoming their own publication. This was a smart way to fill for the audience of women looking for mature and sexual romance stories. Unfortunately, only Be Love is still in publication, with You releasing its final issue in 2018, and Big Comic for Lady only lasting 9 years, from 1981 to 1990. These sexual stories contributed to the notion that ladies' comics were pornographic, with a rise in smaller, wholly erotic magazines coming to popularity in the 1990s. To combat this, a middling demographic was coined that was aimed at girls like shoujo, but wasn't as erotic as ladies' comics. Young ladies. Manga in this category address social issues, like child abuse, with Korosui to Me by Sasaya Nane, sexism, sexuality and gender identity with stories like Double House discussing lesbian relationships and being transgender. This helped establish manga for older women as a more legitimate form of media in the eyes of the public than the soap opera-esque view of before. After all of this, Josei began to re-establish as a term in Japan to distinguish these more mature manga from shoujo. So how about some recommendations for this demographic? Let's go live to the expert himself.
for me, I love a mature story, but I still want relationships, romance, and drama with a bit of social commentary. Princess Jellyfish stars an incredible cast of lovable weirdos. The protagonist for this one is Tsukimi Kurashita, a 19-year-old woman obsessed with jellyfish. One might call her a jellyfish otaku. Look at this Fujoshi looking ass. But she has none of the typical Fujo traits. Her life changes forever when she meets her complete opposite, Koibuchi Kuranosuke. That's my best attempt at that one. A beautiful woman, or is she? Princess Jellyfish is about coming out of your shell and expressing yourself and using fashion to do it. As an adult myself, stories about growing up from the perspective of adults are always refreshing to see. You never stop growing and changing, but most anime about this topic are centered around the youth. Honey and Clover, like Princess Jellyfish, is a vibe unto itself. Premiering in spring 2005, it stars Yuta Takamoto, a fresh-faced, poor as sin art student, and his friends, struggling through the trials and tribulations of university, growing up, and the harsh reality of each of the art worlds they wish to enter. Like most josei, it's glazed in a coat of romance, as is life for many people. The romance in this, however, feels like a side story to you as the viewer, enjoying the highs and lows the characters experience through their journeys of discovery. Each moment landing with so much force, you might have to take a moment of silence after some episodes. When drinking, I regularly play Honey and Clover clips to my friends because I genuinely think the antics are hilarious, especially the dub. Ironically, I never watched Honey and Clover while I was at art school. I feel like that might have been a missed opportunity. If nothing else, check out the openings. They are pure joy for me. Interestingly, in Japan, the manga was written and illustrated by Chika Umino and was serialized in a Josei magazine, whereas when it was released in the West, it was published in Shoujo Beat, the Shoujo magazine. Incidents like this are why it's best to make up your own mind and try out anime that seem interesting. Understanding demographic differences are important to point you in the right direction, but ultimately it's up to you to decide what's right for you. If Honey and Clover or Princess Jellyfish sound right up your alley, then definitely add it to your list. Josei is probably my favorite demographic, and I'm also a big romance fan. You can't beat the feeling of seeing the couple you've been rooting for finally get together. But what about anime for older guys, I hear you asking? Well, let my partner in crime here talk to you about her area of expertise.
If you've been paying attention, you can probably guess what Seinen is by process of elimination. Manga for older boys and men, specifically not so specifically 18 to 40. I guess after 40 you're supposed to graduate to being a real adult and pick up a novel. Growing up reading manga, I never really paid attention to demographic and instead just tried to read every single completed manga in the psychological and thriller categories. Because of this, I inadvertently ended up consuming a lot of seinen content. When we first met, it was actually a running gag that we both subverted our tastes, with him being into shoujo and me being a little deaf game gremlin. Part of this is because I was introduced to anime and manga by both of my parents, and a lot of the anime that they had access to in the 90s and early 2000s were very seinen leaning, with anime like Akira, Hellsing and Ghost in the Shell being imported to the West at the time. Having family who were willing to buy you anime and manga was definitely a blessing as a young teen, and I have fond memories of receiving the first few volumes of Hellsing and all of Claymore in DVD from the husband of some relative who was very excited to get to buy gifts for someone who was also into anime. Probably shouldn't have gifted those to a 13-year-old. That excitement on both parties' sides of having a common interest is something I try to bring to the table when I talk about anime. And now that I'm older, I get to be the cool cousin who buys Miku merch as a gift. Much like between shoujo and josei, there is an overlap and blurry edges to it all. Shonen and seinen have this same ambiguity. And on the topic of ambiguity, my teachers were right about not using Wikipedia as a source. I've never encountered so many dead links and misattribution in my life, which just makes chronicling the history and definitions within the subculture of anime and manga so much more important. Compared to the other three, where their Wikipedia pages provided interesting jump boards for further research, seinen gets 4 paragraphs and a list of publications from 2009 to 2010, which was actually beneficial for me for finding some older out-of-print publications. So we're gonna have to get deeper with this. Luckily, a surprising amount of academic work has been done on the topic of manga, as it rightfully should have been. There is sociological value in archiving and analysing subcultures, and it can be interesting to see what 487 results. Now that may seem a lot, but manga as a whole gives us over 600,000 results. Shoujo around 2,500, shonen 1,500, but that's still better than 232 for josei. But these are books and academic texts, so surely we can bring something interesting from here. Okay, so panel configurations in shoujo manga by Natsume Fusanoke et al. Makes an interesting point that the expressive and imaginative paneling in shoujo manga became an industry norm in the 1990s and became common in seinen, which is interesting but not really seinen specific. Here we go, Manga, an anthology of global and cultural perspectives by Tony Johnson Woods. This details how seinen manga developed as a parallel to the social commentary in 1970s shoujo manga, describing the idea of salaryman manga, which presented relatable stories of working men. Hirokane Kenshi's manga, Kosakushima, has been following the story of the titular Kosakushima for so long he's been promoted from section chief all the way up to president of the company. Considering it's still in publication, I hope in another decade we get to see Mr. Shima as Prime Minister of Japan. This series also got 3 different games and a collaboration with That Time I Was Reincarnated as a Slime. If it wasn't over £50, I would absolutely be picking up a copy of this DS game to make a video on and see what that's all about. Much like josei, seinen is characterized by its emphasis on mature topics like sex, drugs, and philosophical ideas of one's place in society. While shonen also discusses these things, it tends to be in a school setting, and as someone who was once a school child, the existentialism of being 14 is very different to 24. Not to say that one is worse than the other, they just express themselves differently. And I found myself becoming less able to cope with the issues of teenage protagonists, and seeking more realistic and mature stories through manga, like Ikigami by Masai Motaro, which depicts a dystopian semi-future Japan where people are randomly given 24 hours to live. This is to spur the rest of society into being more socially proactive and living like each day is their last, because, well, it just might be. As well as showing the stories of these people's last days, it also follows the protagonist Fujimoto, who works as the person who delivers these Ikigami death messages to their recipients. Over time, we see him doubt the systems and try to find himself within this extreme world. I still haven't finished the series because every story made me sob so hard I couldn't continue it. I fully recommend it if you love crying. Interestingly, a lot of these academics are discussing shoujo manga because it's so crazy this medium exists that caters so heavily towards young girls. And because of this, it often reduces seinen to a footnote of the idea that manga is divided into 4 demographics. This made research fun. Like this book, Adult Manga by Sharon Kinsella. It references seinen once, and that's in reference to the idea that 4 categories exist in manga: shoujo, shonen, seinen, and ladies comics. But also shows this cool graph about how those terms came to be over the years. It also describes seinen as being adult manga indiscriminate of gender and accounting for 35% of the market share in 1996. Around the 1970s, there was a push to hide seinen as its own category. Instead, the homonym seinen-shi, meaning both youth magazine and adult magazine, was used to slip mature manga into publication through the ambiguous designation. This was because the Japanese government felt the need to condemn adults for the sin of having fun and reading manga, so publications were less likely to target their adult demographic to avoid this stigma. The industry began to accept its adult readers in the 1980s, which is when the 4 demographics started solidifying into their more contemporary meanings. This was as a way to meet the needs of their maturing readers who did in fact still want to read manga even though they had jobs. Where shoujo manga often reference or adapted foreign female-centric novels, there is a large subgenre of seinen which adapts historical fact and fiction into manga, with adaptations of Romance of the Three Kingdoms being such a common topic that Wikipedia has an article that lists 20 different manga and various other publications from different countries. And none of those are kingdom, because it turns out that's actually based on the Warring States, which happened 600 years later. Other popular topics are the Tale of Genji, Vikings, World War I and II, and samurai. This is often described as specialist manga, as it also caters to subgenres of otaku, like Gunji Ota and Rekishi Otaku. Understanding these terms and ideas is helpful to tracking down manga and anime that aligns with any pre-existing interests you have. So if anyone wants a video on that, let us know in the comments. Trust me that no matter the topic, there will be a manga catering to it. Have you ever wanted to be someone else so badly you'd contact a dodgy website to switch bodies, and ended up possessing the body of a popular idol who's not as sweet as her onstage persona implies? No? Well, if you want to see how badly that can get out of hand, I recommend Meyonaka no X Giten by Yamaguchi, a short but satisfying, if a little confusing, 27-chapter manga that made me sit and stare at a wall for a while after finishing it. As a seinen, it covers some heavier subjects, which are tied to a lot of the plot twists, so all I will say is to be careful if you're sensitive to extreme topics and maybe look into it a little further. This author also wrote Tomodachi Game, but that's a shonen and thus of no use to us. A lot of my recommendations are based on the principle I hold true in 99% of scenarios. If it made me cry, it is a good piece of art. Main problem with this system is I cry super easily, but I stand by the notion that if it moves you to tears, it's doing something right. So when I recommend Homunculus by Hideo Yamamoto, I do so despite my own issues with it, because I think other people should experience its story as well. Following a middle-aged man caught between worlds. After the car he was living in got towed away, he is forced to accept the offer of 700,000 yen to undergo a medical procedure from an eccentric amateur. This medical procedure is being trepanned, having a hole drilled in your head. Initially he feels fine, but eventually he starts to hallucinate people's issues as physical expressions affecting their body. He uses this to try and solve their problems, mostly to get out of poor situations he put himself in. And along the way he has to face his own moral dilemmas. It's a very somber and quiet manga that makes a lot of interesting commentary that I think is important to consider, despite the more dubious elements. It also got a live-action movie on Netflix recently, which I really enjoyed.
Space Brothers! Oh man, I have to recommend Space Brothers! Set in the distant future of 2025, oh my god. The story stars Muta as he gets his ass in gear and attempts to join his brother as a fully fledged astronaut and fulfill their childhood dream. We get to follow him for a full 99 episodes and every single episode is worth it. The characters are just so incredibly likable and watching each of them try to achieve their dreams as an adult is motivating as hell. I loved seeing the inner workings of the Japanese space exploration agency JAXA. I initially thought this was a spoof on NASA, but no, it's the real name. I don't want to spoil too much in the video, but as the rest of of my recommendations. It's so worth it, please watch it. With that, we've spoken about the 4 main demographics you need to know as a new anime fan. The most important thing to keep in mind is that these 4 terms, Shounen, Shoujo, Josei, and Seinen, are demographic indicators to help you decide which anime and manga are worth your time. This video was primarily made to help Western fans in their quest for more things to watch and read. I hope this video was helpful, if not maybe informative? Anyway, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please feel free to hit like and subscribe. We have many different interesting things going on, so do check down in that description. We will see you all next time.